Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Violence against women is not a private issue, it's a public crisis. Across the world, 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence within their lifetimes. Now, here in Malaysia, headlines about violence and abuse and even murder of women and girls serve as a stark reminder that we are far from eliminating this pervasive problem. So to mark International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women on November 25th, we'll explore if our laws and systems here adequately protect women or if there are blind spots that we need to confront. So joining us on the show now is Dr. Haezreena Begum Abdul Hamid, who is a criminologist and Deputy Dean of Higher Degree at Universiti Malaya's Faculty of Law. Dr. Haezreena, thank you for being on the show with me today. I want you to tap into your experience as a criminologist and maybe share with us what you have observed. What does violence against women look like in Malaysia today?
Okay, thanks, Lisa. So, violence against women, particularly in Malaysia, can be seen in various forms. We are very accustomed to thinking and only seeing physical violence, but violence against women is not just bruises, scar, break of bones, and all that. That's one form of horrific abuse, of course. Violence against women, where women are being harmed. Either by their spouse, partners, family members, or anyone, any individual. There's also sexual violence, which would include rape, sexual assault, molestation, sexual harassment. That's also violence against women. And then we always seem to overlook that there's also violence against women through financial means, where, for example, the women's earnings are being taken away from them by, usually when this happens, is that by the family members or their spouse. They work hard, but their earnings are being taken away. And then there's also emotional blackmail. There's also psychological and emotional harm. Simple emotional and psychological harm, which borders into physical violence, like you do not allow the woman to sleep, for example. She's supposed to just stay up and stay up and not sleep. That's like simple techniques that's being used. Not allowed to eat certain type of food, deprivation, isolation. That is also violence against women. They're not allowed to go out of the house unless being chaperoned. So there's countless types that I can name, which should also be highlighted, because we only tend to highlight the physical and the sexual violence.
Yeah, thank you for kind of laying out the nuances of how violence can be perpetrated against women. I think sometimes we fall into the stereotype that's portrayed in popular culture, but it's so much more nuanced than that. I do have to ask you though, I mean, we have had this conversation so many times as a society, as policymakers looking at this. Why do you think it has remained such a persistent problem for decades now, despite all this advocacy work, the good work that's been done by CSOs and all the awareness campaigns? Why is there still such a huge problem of violence against women? And we see that the data shows that it's still continuing.
Yeah. As you correctly pointed out, Mel, it's been going on for decades. We're all the while trying to find a solution. Of course, we cannot find a solution. We can try and minimize. There's always efforts being done to minimize harm. The problem is because there's a lot of normalization of violence that's happening in culture. It's embedded. This normalization of violence is embedded in culture, sometimes in religion, sometimes, which is being misinterpreted in most times in religion. And then it's also embedded in state structures. Sometimes it's also embedded in laws. where people tend to overlook and dismiss it by not saying that it's harmful, because we always have this stereotypical presumption that for a woman to be harmed, there need to be bruises, there need to be fractures, there need to be bleeding. Other than that, violence against women is not looked at as something so serious or pervasive unless you get that. And this thing, actually, one thing that's a bit worrying, it transcends all the way into many areas, even in terms of proving cases in court as well. For example, even in cases of trafficking in women, for example, there's always the need, although it's not necessary, to show that there's some kind of bruises, some kind of injury. Same with sexual cases. But that's because this injury is not necessarily, you cannot necessarily see it, visible from the naked eye. The injury can be from inside. The trauma, you cannot see trauma from outside. So I think there's always people who try to sustain and make sure that this normalization of violence continues so that they minimize that violence against women. There's always this quarters who try to do that in the name of culture, in the name of religion, in the name of policies. So I think we need to really look at that.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? When we talk about normalizing violence against women, there's also this culture of silence that's normalized around the violence. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, very good, Melisa. So there's always this issue of silence and silencing. So women, particularly, women, they're expected to keep quiet. When, for example, if the husband or partners beat them, you're supposed to keep quiet and just cry on your own, console yourself. In the sense that, we don't want to, kita tak nak malu. Always this thing about shame, This is an internal affair. Keep quiet, and it becomes even more complicated when the aggressor, especially if it's the husband who says that, your heaven is under my feet, So if I hit you, I'm actually entitled to do it in the name of educating you. So you should keep quiet, because if anything happens to the marriage, you are the cause for the marriage to be broken down. Meruntuhkan masjid. They use all these kind of terms, unfortunately. So everyone, and this thing perpetuates over decades. So when they have daughters, when they have sons, children will observe and they perpetuate the thing over and over again. Always all in the name of, do not bring shame to the family, honor to the family. There are also like some societies who presume that if the husband hit them, it's a sign of love. If the husband do not beat them, the husband might have another woman, because the husband does not care for them. So that clearly shows a normalization of violence, how this harm has been looked at as something sweet and great. So unfortunately, these things happens.
I mean, this is a conversation that we really need to have as a society to change our societal norms and our cultures. But when we think about, when you said state-sanctioned violence against women, I want to think about how we can make the system more conducive to address and eliminate violence against women. When you think about the criminal justice system, for instance, Dr. Haezreena, and how it responds to cases of violence against women, does it do that adequately? Does it understand the gender dynamics of these crimes?
Well, little bit, to a certain extent, yes, but it's not comprehensive enough. It's not robust enough. For example, we still do not recognize marital rape. We do have a clause in the penal code which talks about husband's aggression towards wife. That's about it. And then we do have Domestic Violence Act, But that Domestic Violence Act, if you hear, there's a lot of complaints where authorities are sometimes a bit reluctant to intervene unless it's super serious. So those who are in that cusp of between being injured and are not really taken seriously. And there is always this degree of acceptance that women is supposed to have when it comes to harm. It's always, that's why that is embedded in social practices itself, that goes into the social structures, that or it is something that, you know, you're a woman, you're supposed to behave this way, and if you do not behave this way, then if you are punished, it's your fault. So there's a lot of victim blaming as well that plays interplay, that you are not behaving like an ideal woman or an ideal mother or an ideal sister. There's always this thing about being ideal. So if you deviate from these ideal norms, then everything that happens to you is supposed to be something that you've asked for. So that's how actually things that operates, unfortunately.
And that, I take it, permeates all levels of the criminal justice system. How would we go about addressing that? Is it more training? Is it more capacity building? Is it, you know, thinking about how to assess decisions when it comes to cases that involve violence against women?
Yes, definitely all that, Melisa. I still think there's lack of gender awareness. For example, you know that a simple case of rape, for example, there's still, a need to find evidence to show this involuntary, this unwillingness. Although there's a lot of literature to say that just by non-consenting or just keeping quiet, sometimes women keep quiet not because they like certain things or they're consenting to certain things. Women sometimes keep quiet, and for victims altogether, for that matter, to minimize certain harm. Because sometimes if they voice out something, they might get beating, bashing, you know, they might be sweat upon, insulted. So sometimes women tend to keep quiet. So that's where the silence and silencing come from. And even when they talk, when they say something, is their voices are not heard, is being dismissed. So it just transcends all the way, permeates in all levels. And I find sometimes in many cases, sometimes women have to work doubly hard just to prove themselves. So I think that, you know, that really needs to change. You know, we are not just for decorations, you know, we have a lot of things that we can offer, we can do. So we need to be taken quite seriously.
Can I ask you if you have a message for the audience? You know, talking about this tonight, I mean, it all boils down to how we conduct ourselves individually as part of the fabric of society. Do you have a message as a criminologist, as someone who sees this as part of your work, as part of your research? What message would you have for our audience tonight?
To me, number one is to take care of your own self, to love yourself. Because women are very selfless, because we are trained to be that. It's always other people above us. We look at ourselves the last. But remember that if you do not take care of yourself, you cannot take care of others. Be kind to yourself, because when you're kind to yourself, you take care of yourself, you are taking care of others in your family. And most important, do not let anyone bully you, degrade you. So you need to stand up for yourself. So I think try to be a person who strive for their own self and love themselves.
Dr. Haezreena, thank you so much for your time. That was criminologist Dr. Haezreena Begum Abdul Hamid wrapping up this session of Consider This. We're going to take a quick break here and we'll be right back with more on this topic. Stay tuned.